All right, good morning, AP Gov. Mr. Book here. Happy Thursday. As promised, we've got a live lecture here that hopefully will be a little bit more. It'll feel a little bit more like I'm coming to you live through your computers as opposed to you watching a recording. Even though the majority of you will be watching this as a recording on your own time. If you have any questions as you are watching this, please shoot me a message on Remind or shoot me an email, and I will get back to you pretty quickly. If you were wondering where to find some of these lecture notes, if you remember back to, what was that, Tuesday's class, we had this page right here pop up. If you go to number 5, where it says Review and the Declaration of Independence, Review in D of E. This is actually my Gov main page, but AP Gov looks very similar to this. So just go to where it says Review and the D of I, excuse me. Click on that, and it'll take you right to these lecture notes. I don't want to take up too much time from an intro standpoint, but I hope you're having a great week. I thought like Tuesday's class went really well. It was so great to see you guys, but we have a lot to do. So here we go. So, first and foremost, I want to hit some really basic terms that you should know already, but maybe you don't you don't remember how they are totally defined. So first of all, government, the institutions a society establishes to generate and implement its public policies. Remember, if we want to talk about the definition of government, we want to really think about what our political philosophers said. The political philosophers that very much influenced everything that we see today and very much influenced our founding fathers. So according to our political philosophers like Hobbes, like Locke, like Montesquieu, like Rousseau, these political philosophers knew that this perfect state of nature that would be great if we were born into, right? Like we're born and we have got nobody that has to tell us what to do, what to eat, where to live, how to be safe. We just live in this perfect state of nature with absolute freedom. Well, our philosopher friends, they tell us, well, while that sounds like a perfect state of nature and that's ideal, it's not possible to have these 100% perfect freedoms unless there's some sort of ruling authority. Now, why is that? Well, we'll think about it. If you're born into this perfect society and somebody else is also born into this perfect society and they watch as you grow crops in the middle of this perfect society, we'll call it Book Island, right? You're born onto Book Island, right? And somebody else is born onto an island nearby, right next door. They can see you living on Book Island. You're growing these crops, and they're growing huge, and you've got all this food, and you're getting so fat and suntanned, and you're so happy. And they are desperately skinny. They aren't able to grow any crops. They're not getting suntan, they're getting straight sunburnt, and they're wondering, how do I get that gorgeous skin tone? How do we get that food? Well, they're going to come over and they're going to try to take it from you. If there's no government authority, what's going to stop them from taking it from you? Well, you might try to fend them off, you might try to fight them off, you might try to kill them, whatever it might be. But ladies and gentlemen, eventually what you're going to find is that you're going to need some sort of ruling authority to protect your natural rights. What are natural rights? Well, according to John Locke, they are life, protect your life, liberty, protect your freedoms, and property, protect the stuff that is yours. All right, life, liberty, property, natural rights according to John Locke. Now, Thomas Jefferson was an incredible student of these political philosophers. So our founding fathers, they studied, I told you this last week, but our founding fathers studied the political philosophers. That was their major, quote unquote, in college and during their higher education. They studied political philosophy. So they knew the inner workings of John Locke, and Thomas Jefferson was like, okay, yeah, life, super important. Liberty, super important. He took property and he made it something a little bit different. He called it the pursuit of happiness. Because according to Jefferson, what makes us happy is our pursuit or the ability to pursue things. Things, property. Bigger, if you want to get a bigger house, you need to make enough money to be able to afford a bigger house. Or figure out the skill set to be able to build a bigger house. If you want to have more food in your pantry, you have to be able to go to the store to afford more food, or be able to have the skills or acquire the skills to grow that food or whatever it might be, hunt that food. All right. So Jefferson, the only difference between the natural rights, according to Thomas Jefferson, and the natural rights, according to John Locke, life, liberty, and property, Jefferson takes property and calls it the pursuit of happiness, okay, which you guys have heard of before. So these government systems are put in place to protect our natural rights. Government, the institutions a society establishes to generate and implement its public policy, okay? So what is politics? Politics, quite simply, is who gets what, when, and why. All right? Who gets what, when they get it, and why do they get it. All right? And the study of government and the study of politics is why you're here, AP US Government and Politics. All right? So you're going to study the institutions, and you're going to study who gets what, when they get them, and why certain people get certain things. Okay? Now, a couple more kind of definitions that I think you've gotten from U.S. history, world history, 8th grade, 7th grade, whatever it might be, that I want to cover real quick. First of all, public policy. All the laws, regulations, and rules that a government desires to implement. Nice and easy. Public policies are the laws or the rules or the regulations. Okay. Public policy is normally passed by the legislative branch, but as we're seeing during this pandemic and especially during times of crisis throughout history, the executive branch, aka the head of the executive branch with the president, the head of the executive branch here locally at the state level are called governors. We a lot of times we see in times of trouble, we see public policy get made even at the executive branch. And as we go through the year, you're going to find, hey, public policy can be changed, altered, and amended even at the judicial branch. So really all three branches of American government have public policy power right now, especially during times of strife, conflict, tragedy, etc. All right? Now, speaking of times of strife, tragedy, conflict, etc., power seems to grow inside the government or inside individuals within the government when there is times of crisis. Power is the ability of one person to get another person to act in accordance with the first person's intentions. Now, one of the most important quotes that you can learn early on in AP Gov is that power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. Power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, if you didn't write that in your notebooks last week, make sure you've got that written down in your notebooks. Take your highlighter, highlight it, and please, please, please know that a guy by the name of Lord Acton, A-C-T-O-N, a British prime minister, was the one who coined that quote. That's not coming from my personal vocabulary. It's a great quote, though. Power corrupts. The ability of one person to get another person to act in accordance with the first person's intentions. That's powerful. Being able to control somebody else is powerful. If only one person has all the power, absolute power, then it's absolutely going to corrupt somebody. Power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely, which is why our founding fathers knew, they knew this quote from Lord Acton, maybe, and they said, listen, we've got to be able to divide the power up. Separation of powers. Legislative makes the laws. Executive enforces the laws. Judicial branch interprets the laws. And when I say interprets the laws, you guys, they're checking to see if they're constitutional or not, if they're okay, if they're legal. Okay, so separation of powers. And then let's say the legislative branch gets a little too powerful, or let's call the executive branch getting too powerful, because a lot of us are seeing in our houses or on social media, we're seeing the reaction to the pandemic as being something where executive powers are becoming too powerful. So let's refer to the executive branch getting too powerful. All right. Well, there's checks on the power of the executive branch. For instance, the legislative branch can start impeachment hearings for those who run the executive branch, or the judicial branch, the highest courts in the land, the Supreme Court of the United States. The Supreme Court could rule that an executive order passed by the president or by a governor is actually unconstitutional and not allowed, and they could say, hey, this has got to go away. All right. So there's not supposed to be absolute power. So this quote by Lord Acton, it's not supposed to really be something that we have to worry about as Americans, because there's checks and balances and there's a separation of powers that were built into our Constitution, built into the very fiber of American democracy. So how do these get built into the fiber of American democracy? Well, it's got to have roots somewhere, right? And it comes from political philosophers, one in which we'll talk about in just one second. All right. Authority and legitimacy. Authority, a person has political authority if his or her right to act in a certain way is conferred by a law or by a state or national constitution. And legitimacy. The U.S. Constitution is unanimously accepted as the source of a legitimate authority. Okay, so authority, a person has political authority if his or her right to act in a certain way is conferred by a law or by a state or national constitution. All right. Each and every one of you has authority based on the fact that the Constitution allows you to be a citizen. To be a citizen, you are given a bunch of extra freedoms, extra rights in this country. If you turn a certain age, you even get more freedoms. As you turn 16, you can get your driver's license. As you turn 18, you can vote. As you turn 21, you can drink legally. And as you turn 25, you can rent a car. And I can keep on going, as we go through with these different authority levels that you get based on age. And what gives you this authority is the legitimacy of these laws coming from the U.S. Constitution, coming from state constitutions. Spoiler alert, there are state constitutions and there are federal constitutions, or there's a federal constitution. Okay, so just a couple of quick reviews, some quick hitters here that I thought you guys would just be able to spend a couple minutes on before we kind of move on. All right, so I've mentioned the word American democracy, or the words American democracy, a lot over the course of the first 3 weeks. Where does this term democracy comes from? Well, if you remember back to your world history classes, I hope you had some great world history classes. When I first started my career here in Rochester, I taught nothing but world and U.S. history, and I loved teaching my freshies about democracy and the roots of democracy. And the roots of democracy come from Athens, Greece, as do so many other things. But when it comes to government, we can't look much further than what was going down in Athens, Greece. All right, so check this out. From the Greek word demos and kratia, all right, demos is the people, kratia or kratia is power or rule. All right, put those together and it is the people rule, or the people have the power. Democracy, power to the people have the power. All right, now in a direct democracy, all the people have all the power because all eligible voters get to vote on all of the issues. In a direct democracy, that is a type of democracy where the people have the most power, all right? So that is like the purest form of 100% democracy is known as direct democracy. Now, in the United States, we don't have a 100% pure direct democracy. For instance, we get to vote for the president, but the electoral college system is really what has the authority to have the final say in which candidate gets elected to the office of presidency. All right, so us as voters, we get to cast our vote and we go into this thing called the popular vote. But as we've seen twice in recent history, the winner of the popular vote does not always equal who gets to sit in the White House, who gets to live in the White House. The most recent example was the 2016 election. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, meaning the most people around the United States voted for her, but President Trump won the electoral college vote, and that's what has the final authority for who lives in the White House. All right. This happened in 2000 as well. This is not just a 2016 thing. This happened in 2000 as well with an Al Gore and George W. Bush election. Now, that election had a whole lot more controversy than the 2016 election. You're like, wait a minute, Mr. Book, more controversy than the 2016 election? Yeah. Believe it or not, this is not the only time in United States history where we've been divided based on politics, you guys. All right, we're a passionate bunch, Americans. And when it comes to passion, comes to politics, sometimes it turns nasty and divided. And we'll talk about that as we go through the class. All right. But in 2000, there was some discrepancies on state voting, and specifically in Florida, and revotes and recasting votes and things like that. And so a little bit of a different story in 2000, but still 2000, 2016, two examples of when we thought maybe direct democracy was something that we had something similar to, where our vote is 100% what we see in terms of outcomes. But that's not the case because we have the electoral college system to check the voice of the people. All right. So we'll talk a lot more about the electoral college system, why it's in place, what truly it is. But for now, I'm just going to keep it at that. Electoral college system is a check, or it is what helps us avoid 100% direct democracy. that make sense? Cool. Aristotle's definition of democracy is the rule of the many. All right. Aristotle, long before the Enlightenment thinkers, we had Aristotle and Plato. We had these philosophers from ancient Greece. All right. And Aristotle said that democracy is the rule of the many. All right. So this just shows you democracy goes far beyond our Enlightenment thinkers who had these ideas about government, had these ideas about democracy during the 1700s. This goes, back to ancient Greece, you guys. All right. In the earliest stages of democracy. So then there's another type of democracy that I want to talk about right now, and that's representative democracy. You guys have probably heard this called republic before. So representative democracy equals a republic. This is where citizens vote in competitive elections. They vote for people to represent their voice, to make political decisions on the behalf of us, the citizens. All right. So direct democracy is where the citizens have the final say. The people rule. The people have the power. In a representative democracy or a republic, we are electing other human beings to make decisions politically on behalf of our thoughts and our beliefs. All right. So if you're like, okay, so Mr. Book, are we closer to a direct democracy or closer to a representative democracy? It's a great question. We're somewhere in between both. All right. Certain aspects of what the founders created and put into the U.S. Constitution makes it seem like we have a direct democracy. Certain things that they put in the Constitution make it seem like we have a representative democracy. So your notes say this: America is not 100% purely a republic, and it is not 100% purely a direct democracy. All right? Cool. All right, I'm going to show you some of my horrible handwriting real quick here. All right, so normally if we're in the classroom right now, I am scribbling all over my whiteboard behind me, all right? And I tried to write on my whiteboard here just a second ago with one of your colleagues, and it just doesn't appear very clear. So I'm gonna use my digital whiteboard here, and hopefully that works for you guys. So we talked about social contract theory last week. And remember, this lecture is not just new stuff, but it's also supposed to be some review, because we're going to ask some assessment questions coming up this week to make sure you guys are picking up what I'm putting down. So social contract theory. Somewhere between 9,000 and 6,000 years ago, there was an uncivilized society, all right? So that perfect state of nature where people were born with perfect freedoms, as John Locke called it. This is an uncivilized society. All right. However, it's not a perfect state of nature, and there aren't perfect freedoms, because even though it's uncivilized, as one group of human beings makes fire, another group of human beings says, I want to learn how to do that, or I want to take that ability to do that. As one group of human beings learns how to hunt more productively, another group of human beings wants to steal the hunting technology, the weapons, in order to hunt better themselves. All right, so we have this uncivilized society 9,000 to 6,000 years ago. And ladies and gentlemen, even in this uncivilized society, there's no protection to life. Let's kill to be able to steal that technology, that hunting technology. Let's kill to be able to take over these lands that are along these rivers, like in Mesopotamia, all right, in Egypt, and in other places that were right along these fruitful water bank systems where you can grow crops as well as kill animals for food. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no protection of life. There's no protection of liberty or freedoms. If you're not getting killed for your new technology, maybe you're being enslaved by this new group that took you over and put you in chains. Ladies and gentlemen, that means that, human beings in this uncivilized society do not have any freedoms or liberties. And then property, obviously, like I said before, your stuff is getting taken. You don't have a protection of property. All right. So John Locke would say here, this is where you need a ruling authority. This is where you need government, because we don't live in a perfect state of freedom. Thomas Hobbes, another political philosopher that we looked into last week, said, people suck. People are mean. People are selfish. People are so ego-driven that we have to have a strong leader, one strong leader that has all the authority. Apparently, he didn't believe in the Lord Acton quote that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Hobbes believed that absolute power is the only thing that doesn't corrupt us. So Hobbes said, people are brutish, they're mean, people suck. All right, they want to get ahead. They want to take what other people have. He said the perfect state of nature is just a falsehood. All right. Now, all the political philosophers, they said, listen, at some point, going from uncivilized to civilized, one of the first things that became that had people go from uncivilized to civilized, not just being able to grow crops to stop following herds for their food source, not just being able to build cities, not just being able to settle down in one area. Folks, another part of what caused uncivilized people to become civilized and civilizations to form is something called the rule of law. Government structures being created. Governments being created to protect natural rights. So, the rule of law is one of the aspects that creates civilizations. We go from uncivilized to civilized. The reason why rule of law was created for these early humans is because there were no protections to life, liberty, and property, and rule of law, or a governing authority to protect our life, liberty, and property, were created to allow for human beings to feel more protected. All right. Now, we see rule of law early on, 1754 BCE, before current era, in Mesopotamia. All right, that is the land between the rivers. Now, if you remember back to your world history classes, in what is modern day Iraq, in Mesopotamia, all right, the land between two rivers. The two rivers are the Tigris River on top, the Euphrates River on the bottom, and between the Tigris and Euphrates is this area called Sumer, also known as Mesopotamia. It's super fertile. In fact, this area was called the Fertile Crescent because plants could be grown here. So civilizations were settling down in this area. All right. Why were they settling down? Because they didn't have to follow animal herds around continents, constantly picking up their camps and following where their food source was going to be traveling to next. No, this was fertile land between two rivers. Being able to grow crops was a huge, huge, huge thing because you could settle down. You could stay in one spot. You stay in one spot. You build up some towns. You start to build up some new technologies, and you need some protections of life, liberty, and property. Ladies and gentlemen, the first written down rule of law that we know is called Hammurabi's Code. All right, from Hammurabi's Code, many, many, many years later, we see where ruling authorities are starting to get a little too powerful. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we're seeing this guy named King John in 1217 in England. He thinks that he is above the law. He's making decisions that make him seem like he is above the law. He is more special than every other person in England. He has more freedoms, more property. And the people of England, specifically the barons who are just beneath him, the king, in the social hierarchy of this feudal system in England, they say, listen, we're going to kill you, cut off your head, and parade your head on a sword throughout the streets saying, look what we did. We demanded more freedoms. We demanded more rights. If you don't sign this rule of law, this law document known as the Magna Carta. So King John's like, head on a pike, or am I going to just kind of tone down me thinking that I'm above the law, almost godlike, which we saw throughout history with different monarchs and different emperors. King John signs the Magna Carta, and ladies and gentlemen, we have our first kind of modern day. I know it's 1217, but it's more modern day than 1754 BCE. We have our first modern day rule of law, constitution-esque document that a higher authority is signing. Jump to 1776, and we have the Declaration of Independence, something that we're going to talk a lot about this week, something that you guys have become experts on already because you're incredible students and you've already done all of your work for this week, which is awesome. And from what I've looked at so far, you've done an amazing job with it. The biggest thing about the Declaration of Independence is that it doesn't hold any law-making authority. So why is it on this list? Well, You don't get an Articles of Confederation 1 year later in 1777, and you don't get a U.S. Constitution 11 years later in 1787 unless we get this Declaration of Independence, the world's most famous breakup letter, the colonists saying, "See ya, King George, see ya, Great Britain. Everything you're doing, all the taxation without representation, everything you're doing to us without asking us is unfair, it's unjust, and we're doing something about it. We're cutting our ties from you." And we're going to cut our ties from you with this document that's essentially going to say we're going to revolt, yes, start a revolution, start the Revolutionary War. We are going to revolt. We're going to remove ourselves from British rule. And not only that, we are going to try to tell every other major world power that doesn't like you too much, Great Britain. We're going to tell every other major world power all the reasons why we don't like you, why we think you're corrupt, and we're going to get them on our side, on our team. That's all in the Declaration of Independence. It's not just a, hey, we're free. It's not just something that is just a document that says, we are breaking up from Great Britain. No, it says we are breaking up from Great Britain, and here's why. We are breaking up from Great Britain, and here's what we want that's better. We are breaking up from Great Britain, and here's who we want to associate ourselves with now, and we're going to need their help in order to fully break up from Great Britain. So folks, next time you send that breakup text to your little boyfriends or girlfriends, please, 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 again, well, actually, don't break up via text, first of all. But if you do, think about the Declaration of Independence format when you're sending that breakup text, all right? Tell the person that you used to love, tell them why you're breaking up with them, tell them what you want that they don't have, and then also tell them the support that you need in order to get what you want and why that support is better than what they're providing you. All right? So if you guys are wondering, why is the Declaration so important, Mr. Book? Why are you spending so much time on the Declaration of Independence here in week 3 of the virtual campus? Why is that basically the only thing other than reviewing and looking at some things from September 11, 2001? Why is that the only thing we're spending our time on this week? It's so that you guys send better breakup texts to your significant others, because right now, just saying, hey, it's over, that's heartbreaking. Anyways, Articles of Confederation 1777, that's another law-binding rule of law document. It's so completely flawed, you guys. It's filled with it's missing so many things because the founding fathers in those days thought that the federal government should not have a ton of power because the states are going to be able to make their laws and rules based on the needs of the people way better than the federal government ever could. And so the states had stronger state constitutions. The Articles of Confederation was the federal rule of law in 1777, but it was filled with holes and weaknesses, which we'll study in the next 2 weeks. And then the U.S. Constitution, the single greatest piece of writing in United States history, ladies and gentlemen, even greater than that Declaration of Independence. Some political scientists, you guys, they call it the Big Bang. The Big Bang. So yeah, like the Big Bang, the creation story for certain people, the Big Bang of democracy in the history of democracy going all the way back to ancient Greece. This is the Big Bang of democracy. Your notes say that. That's awesome. But U.S. Constitution 1787 equals the Big Bang of government or the Big Bang of democracy. All right? Sweet. So as I mentioned before, Thomas Hobbes, quick review. He wrote a book called The Leviathan by describing the state of nature. He thought that all individuals were naturally equal. Every person was free to do what he or she needed to do to survive. As a result, everyone suffered from continued fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Again, if you're put in a situation where you have to do whatever it takes to survive, you might do some brutish things as well. In the state of nature, Hobbes said, there's no laws or anyone to enforce them. And the only way out of this nasty situation where everyone's trying to one-up each other is for individuals to create some supreme power where the legislative, executive, and judicial powers are all held by one single person, and that is an absolute monarchy, which is what Thomas Hobbes believed in. All right, so Hobbes thought we were all born evil in the state of nature. We were all born driven by ego, the want for more, the ability to take more. And in order to get out of this situation, Hobbes said we needed to have a supreme power or absolute power. All right. Now, John Locke said, well, no, absolute power of individuals limits the power of somebody who has absolute power. Locke said natural rights of individuals limit the power of people who think they have all of the power. The king, he said, did not hold absolute power like Hobbes had to say, but it acted only to enforce and protect the natural rights of the people. So this is where Locke is saying the government's one job is to enforce and protect the natural rights of the people. Still to this day, this is the thought of why government exists. In 2020, the government exists to protect our rights, our freedoms, our liberties, our life, our property, our pursuit of happiness. So our natural rights, however you refer to our natural rights, whatever your thoughts are on our natural rights, whether they're more like Jeffersonian with the pursuit of happiness or more Lockean with property, that's the role of government still today in 2020. If a sovereign, somebody who has authority, violated these rights, the social contract was broken, and the people had the right to revolt and establish a new government. All right, so Locke first brings up this idea of the social contract theory. Write it down, everybody. Social contract theory. All right, social contract theory, sometimes called social compact theory, but it means the same thing. All right, and this social contract theory is where we are signing this or believing in or following this rule of law, whether it's the Constitution, Hammurabi's Code, the Magna Carta, the Articles of Confederation, whatever it might be, all right? When we are finding that that document has authority over us, we are also looking for a government structure to also sign that document and enforce that document and believe in that document and not live above that document. And in doing that, we are signing this unwritten rule known as a social contract, an unwritten contract, not written down, that says, hey, government is going to protect your life, liberty, and property. In return, you might have to give up some perfect freedoms, but if you give up some of your perfect freedoms, you're going to have protection to your life, liberty, and property, or your pursuit of happiness, which is what Locke thinks is super important for a government to do. All right. Now, if you're like, wait, Mr. Book, social contract theory is an unwritten, not written down contract, but what about Hammurabi's Code, Magna Carta, Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation, Constitution? It's a great question. Social contract theory was around, long before, and these ideas, according to Locke and these political philosophers, have been around since we first started to settle in these civilizations along these rivers, you guys. The social contract existed before Hammurabi's Code, even. These social contracts are unwritten contracts. It says that there needs to be authority over us to be able to protect the stuff that we want, our natural rights. All right, so we'll talk more about social contract theory in just one second. He declared that owners may do whatever they want with their property as long as they do not invade the rights of others. He said government, was mainly necessary to protect property and encourage commerce and little else. The Lockean ideas here. He wanted representatives to be only men of property and business. Sorry, ladies, you are going to find throughout this first couple of months of this class, you're going to hear a lot of things about white landowning males. White landowning males. I'm going to bring those words up all the time. All right. And it's not because I'm a white landowning male myself, so I'm trying to toot my own horn. No, in fact, I think it's pretty awful that it's only white landowning males that have any political authority from all the way back in John Locke's time in the 1700s until pretty much relatively recently. And still today, it's white landowning males that have a leg up in a lot of parts of our society, not just in our country, but in any modern day government and country. So we'll talk a lot about how we have gone from being a society that is sort of white landowning males have most of the authority to what we have today, where it is a little bit more equal, with still having a ways to go. But Locke said representatives, they need to be men of property and men of business. He said only adult male property owners should have the right to vote. Locke was reluctant to allow the propertyless masses of people to participate in government because he believed that they were unfit. If this sounds familiar, it's because there are still some constructs, like I mentioned earlier, the electoral college system, that is in place to avoid the unfit, the politically unfit. That means that people who aren't politically sophisticated, people who show up to the voting booth and they vote for somebody based on the fact that they like their last name, or based on the fact that, oh, you know what, that name sounds familiar. I think I've heard that name on a commercial on the radio, so I'm going to vote for them. All right. Those types of voters, ladies and gentlemen, the politically unsophisticated voters, those are the type of people that John Locke are like, they shouldn't be making huge government decisions like who represents us. And guess what? That's a major idea that our founding fathers took from Locke and these philosophers. Our founding fathers put into the Constitution, they put constructs into the Constitution to make sure that it was only well-educated white landowning males who got to make major decisions when it comes to who governs us, who represents us. So that's an idea thought of by John Locke. Thanks a lot, John Locke. Montesquieu said this. He wrote that the main purpose of government is to maintain law and order, political liberty, and the property of the individual. He opposed what Hobbes had to say. He opposed absolute monarchies, especially those in his home country of France. He concluded that the best form of government was one in which the legislative, executive, and judicial powers were separate and kept each other in check to prevent any branch from becoming too powerful. He believed that uniting these powers, as in the monarchy of King Louis, would lead to despotism. Despotism, ladies and gentlemen, that's where you see absolute power corrupting absolutely. All right, despotism is where the power goes to your head. Despotism is almost like a sickness where a leader believes that they have all the power, all the ruling authority, and they are above the law. We saw this in France. We saw this in England. The Magna Carta helped to keep England from getting too corrupt. Obviously, there was no hope in France, according to the French people, and that therefore started the French Revolution shortly after the American Revolution was so successful. The French Revolution, some of you guys are familiar with the musical Les Miserables. The French Revolution doesn't happen as you see in that musical Les Miserables, or the work originally written by Victor Hugo. That doesn't happen if the American Revolution isn't successful. All right, so the French Revolution is taken from the ideas of the American Revolution. All right, so these are ideas by Montesquieu. Montesquieu also believes in this, in some of these ideas that Rousseau believes in. Rousseau believed that when people begin to claim ownership of property, inequalities, murder, and wars result. Kind of a Thomas Hobbes-esque, a Thomas Hobbes-esque idea. He believed that the powerful rich stole the land belonging to everyone and fooled the common people into accepting them as rulers. One of my favorite Rousseau quotes says this: "Man is born free, and yet everywhere he is in chains." Circle, underline, or highlight that quote for me, folks. Man is born free, and yet everywhere he is in chains. Rousseau agreed with Locke that the individual should never be forced to give up his or her natural rights to a king. The problem in the perfect state of nature was to find a way to protect everyone's life, liberty, and property while each person remained free. His solution to do this was called the social contract. People should give up some of their rights. And in order to give up some of their rights, life, liberty, and property are going to be able to be protected. All right? Now, Rousseau didn't think it should be an absolute monarch or an absolute leader or a dictator that should be given, that we should give up our rights and give our rights over to this one person. Rousseau thought, he believed in the ideas of a republic. We should give up some of our freedoms, and so should everybody else around us. And then we should all have an equal voice in who represents our thoughts and our ideas. Ladies and gentlemen, we all give up our freedoms on a regular basis. Unfortunately, a lot of times when we give up our freedoms as Americans, it comes during times of crisis. We're talking about September 11th this week, right? After 9/11, we gave up a lot of our freedoms when it comes to protecting us in airports. TSA security tightened up. Security checks, what we were allowed to bring on airplanes, completely changed because of September 11th. We gave up some of our freedoms if it meant protecting our lives and the lives of the most people in our society. Now, there are some political groups and some individuals that don't think we should have to give up any of our freedoms, that we should have all of our freedoms, because the more freedom that we have, the more that we as individuals can protect ourselves and protect our families. That's why those who believe that we should not have any of our gun rights, our Second Amendment rights taken away, one of the reasons why is, no, I'm not going to give up any freedoms when it comes to my Second Amendment rights, my rights to own a weapon, to own a gun, a firearm. I'm not going to give up any of those rights, because if I give that up, that means I cannot be the one to protect my family as much. Those who say that we should be able to give up some of our Second Amendment freedoms and have more gun restrictions are saying, hey, listen, if we're giving up, if I'm individually giving up my gun restrictions and everybody else is too, we're putting our hope into the government that is going to protect us, as opposed to us as individuals protecting us with our own arsenal of weapons. All right, so Rousseau is kind of in that model of a republic is what works best. Now, how do all these ideas lead to the road to revolution? Well, colonist folks, they lacked freedoms, they lacked money, because they were taxed so unfairly and so severely to help finance the British Empire. All right. Now, when I say help finance the British Empire, the British are struggling. Why? Because they're paying for the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War. All right. King George is so in debt because of how long this war is going on. All right. The French and Indian War was not a war that King George thought was going to cost this much money, but he's running out of money, and King George is filled and driven by ego. Remember, England has the strongest navy the world has ever seen, and a very strong army as well. And King George can't imagine losing. He can't imagine losing this war. So he needs more money for war technology. All right. So in order to get that money, he turns to the places in which the British have already imperialized. Now, imperialize means take over and rule from afar. So obviously, British Empire includes India. British Empire includes America, the 13 original colonies. And so they start to tax these major imperialized places. And in America, they tax all the things that colonists need and use on a regular basis. Sugar. The Stamp Act, you guys, you've heard this before. Oh, a tax on stamps, big whoop. I never even use stamps, Mr. Book. Well, you guys, the Stamp Act is basically a tax on every single paper product. It's not just on putting a stamp on an envelope, because you might be able to, even in those days, you might be able to get away with not sending a whole lot of letters as correspondence, even though that's the major way of correspondence, all right? But it's a tax on any paper product, not just stamps. So try to look around you right now. Look at everything that's made of paper or cardboard sitting around you. Now, everything that you have sitting around you that's made of paper, all these things are going to cost a significant more amount of money based on what the Stamp Act says. Then the Tea Act, all right? Take away our sugar, take away our paper, take away our tea. And then there was taxes on alcohol as well, on liquor. And the colonists are like, well, this is silly. We can't live like this. We cannot live like this. And not only can we not live like this, it would be one thing if we were being asked if it was okay to raise these taxes, but they weren't. And this famous quote that you've all heard, no taxation without representation, no taxation without representation. This means that there was taxation. And maybe that would be okay to raise taxes if it meant the betterment of their society. But the fact that they weren't even given any sort of representation, any sort of say in what got taxed or how it got taxed, that's where the problem was. All right, so I mentioned earlier that white landowning males, right, have all this authority, all this power early on in American politics. Well, only men with property could cast votes in England and also in American elections during the 13 original colonies. Therefore, the majority of citizens had zero say in political matters, and yet we're still being forced to pay this big amount of money through this taxation. All right. So, there's a lot of problems here, right? There's a lot of problems here. Again, I got the hashtag white landowning males matter, hashtag non-white landowning males matter down here. Because if there were hashtags around these times, we would see this whole movement for, white landowning males really like the fact that they have all this power. So they're going to push that they should continue to have all this power. But as tensions grow and protests grow and the free press start to print things like Thomas Paine's Common Sense that says, here's the reasons why the colonists are angry and why they should revolt. And then Alexander Hamilton starts to use his voice, and he's such a good writer. Everything he prints is propaganda saying, you know what? It's not just white landowning males who deserve to have a voice. It is other, well, unfortunately, because Hamilton is a founding father that sets the precedent for white landowning males having a lot of power. But in these days, he's not being influenced by other powerful white landowning males. So in these days, Hamilton pre-Constitution is saying, you know what? It's not just the powerful and mighty who own land who deserve to have a say. It is the poor. It's smart, educated women that he was surrounded with, that he surrounded himself with, including his wife, Eliza. Ladies and gentlemen, Hamilton and some of these early sons of liberty, they would have started the hashtag non-white, non-landowning, non-males matter. So we start to see this kind of divide, right? This divide between these two ideas. One of these ideas, white landowning males matter, is coming from England, and this other idea that non-white, non-landowning, non-males matter, and these two ideas are colliding. And this on top of the taxation without representation, all these unfair taxes, these are the roots to revolution. This is all things that are on the road to revolution. So I know you guys have heard of the taxation without representation, that led to war. But here's something else, right? It's this new idea that the Sons of Liberty believe that, hey, we want to have a voice, but so do other people that don't own land, who might be immigrants. All right, so they might not be white. The other people that females that have a strong education, stronger than what was coming from other places where women had no education in England and pretty much every other modern society in those times. So this is another part of the road to revolution, folks. All right. And the Declaration of Independence, which you're spending a lot of time on this week because I think it's so important for exactly where we're at right now. It's more than just a piece of parchment that declares us free of British rule. Like I mentioned before, it's a plea for help. A plea for help. All right? A plea for help. The Declaration of Independence provides a foundation for the concepts of popular sovereignty, the idea that the government will exist to serve the people who elect representatives to express their will. Circle, underline, highlight popular sovereignty, ladies and gentlemen. Popular sovereignty, or POP-SOV, just means that the government exists to serve the people, and the people elect the government officials. Again, the government exists to serve the people, and the people elect the government officials. That's POP-SOV, or popular sovereignty. All right? And in 1776, the 13 British colonies in North America were rebelling against British rule after more than a decade of strife over taxation and no strong government representation. As the Revolutionary War got underway, representatives from each of the colonies agreed it was time to make a strong statement expressing the colony's reasons, and this task to put out this strong statement fell on the 33-year-old from Virginia, Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson, like I mentioned earlier in this lecture, was a student of John Locke's. He believed in Lockean ideas more than anything else. And with that, folks, that's the last slide I think I wanted to show you. Let me just take one more look here. Yep, that's the last slide I wanted to show you. Let me just clarify just a couple of things that I wanted to double check on that I know I missed. And that is, first and foremost, that when it comes to our friend Montesquieu, right, the biggest takeaway that you guys need to know when it comes to Montesquieu is that Montesquieu believes strongly in the ideas of separation powers and checks and balances. We stole those ideas and we wrote them within the fabric or the DNA of our country, known as the U.S. Constitution. Separation of powers, meaning that the legislative, the branch that makes the laws, the executive, the branch that enforces the laws, and the judicial branch, the branch that interprets the laws, that they need to have a separate, different powers, different opportunities to rule. And they also need to be able to check each other's power, because what Montesquieu was seeing in France was one unfit ruler in King Louis, one unfit ruler who had all the power in the legislative, all the executive power, and all the judicial power. And obviously that wasn't working for the French people. All right. So Montesquieu said, listen, if we had a separation of powers and King Louis was just in charge of the executive branch, but there was another ruling group that was in charge of making the laws and another ruling group that was in charge of interpreting the laws, judicial branch, legislative branch, and he was just in charge of the executive branch, maybe life wouldn't be so bad here in France, because France, it's a cool place. All right. So I just want to clarify that real quick. Everything else, I think we've hit really well over the last couple of weeks. All right. So we're looking at a quiz on everything that I've talked about so far today. I hope today felt like a review with just a little tidbit of new information. Make sure you're getting your Declaration of Independence on this week on your own, because that is going to be the focus of, we can't move on to talking about the Articles of Confederation. We can't move on to talking about the Constitutional Convention unless you guys have your kind of grasp on, your firm grasp on understanding that document written by the 33-year-old from Virginia, Thomas Jefferson. Hey, have a great week, everybody. See you in office hours, or we'll see you next Tuesday. Take care.